Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to create 4 quick layered cards using the May 2026 Steamboat Willie card kit from Love from Lizi. The first thing I pull out here is a sequin pack. This is an add-on and I'm going to be using it for my last card. I'm going to create a shaker card with that. Then we have our main kit here. I also have a couple add-ons underneath here. There are some peel-off sticker packs. I'm going to be using one. There's one that has some stars on it, so I'm going to be using that for some of the background. Then we have this foil pack. I'm not going to be using this in this video, but I wanted you to see the gorgeous foil colors in this pack. Absolutely stunning and some unique colors there. That lime green is really beautiful. Then we have our main kit here. So there's a ton of stuff in just the main kit. You don't necessarily need the add-ons, but they do coordinate really nicely and are great add-ons for these, especially if you like to make shaker cards or like to use the peel-off stickers for additional elements. So the first thing here is an embellishment pack. We have a bunch of different trims here, as well as some different charms. So there's some silver charms. I will be using those in this video. And then we've got some like button charms here. I won't be using them in this video, but there's so much different variety in here that's really quite unique. The 6x6 paper pack here is printed papers. There's some generic prints as well as some Steamboat Willie prints. I'm going to be using the generic ones for the backgrounds. I want my printed die cuts to be the main focus of my cards. We also have a stamp set here. I'm going to be using one of the sentiments from the stamp set as well as the banner stamp there. The main images I'll be using on my video on the Love from Lizi YouTube channel. That die set, we have a film strip as well as ticket stubs. I will be using that on one of my cards. There's also some peel-off stickers in here, some solid cardstocks. I'm going to be using some of those solid cardstocks for my mat. I'll also be using the stitched circle dies from the Love from Lizi site. I thought this was perfect for these cards because it really goes with the ship's wheel and like the life preserver from this kit, and it coordinates with some of the things in here. So I'm going to be using that for several of my layers on each one of the cards. Here is the package of pre-printed die cuts. So there's a ton in this package. I always love all the different images, all the different choices you get in here. So these are all different images from Steamboat Willie. So we have a lot of Steamboat Willie there. Then we have some animals that are in that as well. We also have Captain Pete that is in that. I'm going to be using him on my first card, and then some generic things like stars, the anchor, the life preserver. There are so many pieces to choose from in this package. I'm going to be creating 4 cards, but you could easily create more with all of the different options in here. And I love too that there's some duplicates of each of the images, but just with some color changes, so you can pick and choose which color is going to suit what you're creating best. So I'm going to start off with using Captain Pete on my first card. I have one of the pieces of printed paper there. I also have a bunch of these solid cardstocks pre-cut. So for all of my cards, I use a piece of black cardstock that I had from my stash, and I cut them to 4 inches by 5¼ inches for an outer mat for my card. I thought it just coordinated with the black outlining on the pre-printed die cuts. I also have the outer circle that I've die cut for each of the cards in black as well. I've used the black from the solid cardstock in the kit, and it echoes that or coordinates with that as well. Now, when I chose my circles, I chose 3 that were within or that were right beside each other in the layered stitch circles die set. The largest one I chose to be just a little bit tinier than the 4 inch by 5¼ inch black mat that I created. I didn't want my circles too small. You could definitely make them smaller for some of them. I wanted to see those circles in the background. So I made sure to choose from the largest one, and then I just chose the 2 down from it in that set. For the rest of the layers, it's just a matter of layering everything together. I'm using liquid glue. I have it in a fine line bottle. I use this for gluing most things together. I find it's really convenient, especially with die cuts and pre-printed die cuts. When you use liquid glue, you don't have to use a whole lot, as well as the fact that you can lift die cuts up while you're assembling to tuck things underneath like I'm doing right here. Often when I'm creating, I will decide to tuck something behind or whatnot, and it's nice to have that forgiveness and be able to do that afterwards. So for this card, I'm going to be using one of the sentiments from the stamp set. In those pre-printed die cuts, there are 3 different sentiments in there, and because I wanted to create 4 cards, I wanted to make sure that all of my cards had sentiments. So I'm going to be using the banner stamp in this set as well as one of the sentiments in this set. perfect for adding with those circles because that banner has that curved edge to it. It echoes the circles perfectly. I have some burgundy colored ink from my stash that I'm using to stamp that onto some white cardstock. Then I'm going to emboss my sentiment on top of that. I'm going to be using the Raven Black embossing powder. This is just going to give it just a little bit of extra texture. Sometimes when we're using printed papers or printed die cuts, there is not a whole lot of texture to it, and as well, there's not a whole lot of different finishes to it. So I always like to find different ways to add different finishes and different textures to my card. So by embossing this sentiment on here, it's going to add that little raised edge to it. As well, it's going to contrast with the burgundy ink that I've used for the outline of the banner. Once I've poured my embossing powder in there, I pour the excess right back into the container, and then I use my heat tool to melt that powder. Then I'll let it cool for a few seconds and use my detailed scissors in order to fussy cut it. There is no die that coordinates with this banner, but I definitely want it cut out. It's going to look so much better on the front of the card. Now I'm going to die cut it with just a slight white halo around there. So as I'm doing my die cutting or my fussy cutting, I'm making sure that that white edge that I'm creating is the same all the way around. When I fussy cut as well, I use my left hand to move the paper into the path of the blade of my scissors. My right hand doesn't really change too much when I'm fussy cutting. It pretty much stays fairly stationary, and I use my left hand in order to move that cardstock and make sure that we have a nice smooth cut. This is the best way to do fussy cutting. I find that if you're using your right hand if you're right-handed, mind you, if you're using your right-handed and you're moving it too much, you're going to have a little bit less control. This way you have a good amount of control over those scissors and over that cardstock. So once I have that done, you could ink this if you wanted it to be a little bit more contrasting. I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm going to put it right on the edge of those circle layers on that background of the card. Now to add a little bit of extra texture, I'm going to use some of the silver charms, or one of the silver charms on this one. I have that anchor from there, and I'm just using my white glue to glue it on. You will need to leave it to dry for a few moments when you want to, or when you use liquid glue for this. Another option would be to use a glue dot. I didn't have any glue dots that were tiny enough. The ones that I have would show, and I didn't want anything showing. So the liquid glue was the good alternative, but it does take a little bit longer for that to dry. Now, most of the designs for the cards are fairly similar because I have rectangle mats on my background as well as circle mats in the center of the card, but I love all the different papers and the different printed die cuts to make them different. Now, I am pulling my stamp set from my April kit. This is just some waves. I just thought it would work really well with these die cuts and just add a little bit of detail to the background. Now I just stamped it because I didn't have any love from Lizi Navy embossing powder. If you have the navy embossing powder, I think it would be fantastic to heat emboss it to add that extra little bit of texture as well. I just had a navy ink from my stash, and I just stamped it on the background to add that little bit of texture. Once my card is done, I'm going to be adding some glitter glue to those waves just to add a bit of texture and a bit of sparkle. So once I have my background mats, and like I said, the sizes are all the same. My black cardstock is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My printed cardstock is 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And then I have those same 3 circles. And I chose to keep the same 3 circles for all 3 cards, or all 4 cards, rather than changing the sizes for each one of the cards. And I chose to do 3 layers for the cards for those circles because I wanted that black around the outside. I wanted the white on the inside, but I wanted to use some of the colors in the kit that coordinated with the die cuts that I was creating. So I put those main layers together, and then I have my Bon Voyage pre-printed sentiment from the pre-printed die cuts. I wanted to give it a little bit of color. So I'm taking my burgundy ink and I'm ink blending it, but I'm doing it a little bit more ombre. So it's lighter towards the top, darker towards the bottom, just for a little bit of color variation. I just think they look a little bit more interesting like this. Rather than having it all a flat color, it's just going to add a bit of interest. Once I have that ink blending done, I clean off my mat, set it to the side, and I can add that to my card. And once again, I'm adding the sentiment right to the curve of my circle layers because I just think it echoes that curve, and I think it looks really nice right on there. and it ties everything in together. Last step is to add those glitter glue bits to the water. I thought it would look great on the water and on the foam. And then I'm going to add another anchor because I thought it worked well with the ship on this one. So once again, it does take a little bit of time for the liquid glue to dry on that anchor because it's a non-porous surface, as well as the glitter glue to dry. For the third card, we have a very similar card to the first two with the large black rectangle. This one's trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4. We have another one of the printed papers from that 6-inch paper pack. And when I trim these down, I keep all my extra pieces because you could use those extra pieces for more elements on other cards, or you could even add some of those pieces on the inside of the card if you wanted to echo the colors on the inside of the card as well as the prints from those printed papers. Then I'm adding the 3 different layers of my circles. I started with the 2 and then realized that I wanted to do the same wave stamp on the background here. Now this wave stamp could be omitted. You could just use some simple ink blending on the background if you wanted, or you could leave it white. For this card, we have a Steamboat Willie sentiment from the pre-printed pack. I'm using my navy ink to ink blend that. Once again, doing a little bit of ombre, making it lighter towards the top, darker towards the bottom for just a bit of visual interest. Once that's done, we can take that off the mat, clean that up so that it's clean for the next time I want to use it. And then we can add the rest of our pieces to the front of our card. So I'm going to add that circle with the wave. Then I'm going to be adding some of my die cuts. Now you can pick and choose how high or low you stamp that wave, as well as how high or low you put your pre-printed die cuts on top of it. I don't mind covering some of that wave. It's just adding some interest and detail to the back. It doesn't need to be completely seen. Another option here would be, if you saw my video from the April kit, to go and stamp and emboss this with the ivory pearl or oyster pearl embossing powder, and then do ink blending with it if you wanted to have more color to the background and have that raised texture from the embossing. That's another option here as well. That once I was done that, I added my sentiment to it, and then I'm going to be using the yellow stars from this peel off pack. I'm using a die pick in order to help pick up those stickers there. Some of them are really, really tiny, and I don't want my fingers to take the sticky away from them. So the easiest way to do it is to use a die pick to pick underneath that sticker, lift it up, and then add it to the card. There's 3 different sizes on this sticker sheet, so I'm choosing several of the different sizes so that my stars are all different sizes. So I chose 3 of the different sizes on the right side. I'm once again doing 3 of the different sizes on the left side, and then I will add just a couple on the top on the background just to kind of echo the stars on my image piece onto that background. This particular printed paper is a star print, so I thought the star stickers went really well with that star print. So once I have that done, once again, I'm going to add that glitter glue to those waves just to add that little bit of extra sparkle. Now, one thing I didn't do for these cards, but you certainly could, is you could use some glossy accents or something on an area to give it a glossy domed texture. The only area that I thought it would kind of suit is the buttons on Steamboat Willie's shorts. But I also thought it would look a little bit odd. So I opted not to do that. If you by chance have like mini buttons, I think those would be really cute on there. I don't have any and I don't know where to get them. So I opted to just leave it plain, but that would be a great way to add some texture. So this is my last card, and I'm going to be creating a shaker card with this. I used my 2 inner circles, cut them together with white cardstock, and I created 5 different rings. I'm going to glue 4 of them on top of each other. I also have a piece of clear acetate that I used my die to cut it out. Then, because it didn't cut all the way through with all of that stitching detail, I used my scissors to cut it out. That die just kind of gave it a guideline for where to cut. Now, if you choose to use circles where you have a larger border, you could use some foam tape to create your shaker box. By using cardstock, I just can layer those together to create that dimension. Once I have those 4 layered together, I'm gluing it to that black background. And then my 5th one here is going to get glued on top of that acetate to cover the edges of that acetate. Now, because we're putting that cardstock on the acetate, it's going to take just a little bit longer to dry because the acetate is a non-porous surface. This is where I'm using the film die from in that kit. I have it die cut out of some black cardstock, and then I just took some scrap white cardstock, trimmed it to around the same width as that film strip, glued that together, and then I can let that completely dry. While that's drying, I can glue the layers to the base of my card, and I'm doing all A2 card bases here. You could obviously create larger cards if you want. I tend to prefer the A2 size. It's my favorite size, so that's what I tend to go with. So once again, that black mat is trimmed to 4 inches by 5¼ inches. My blue printed piece here is trimmed to 3¾ inches by 5 inches. I'm adding the film strip on the background just for a little bit of additional detail. Now I left my film strip white. You could take some of those printed papers and trim them down and put some of the prints behind that film strip. I chose not to do that for this card simply because I thought it was going to be just creating a little bit too much busyness in the background. I wanted my shaker box and the die cut on the front of it to be the main focus. So once I have my base of my shaker on my card, I can put those sequins in there. Now, once I poured them in there, there's different sizes in there. I'm taking some of the bigger ones out. I want these smaller ones in that shaker box. And I also shake it a little bit to flatten them. I don't want to have a pile of them that would get stuck there. Then I can glue my top part to the base of the shaker. Once again, because I'm gluing that acetate to that cardstock, I need to give it just a little bit of extra time for that to completely dry because we're working on a non-porous surface here. Now for this sentiment, I left it as is. You certainly could do ink blending on it if you wanted, but I thought we had enough going on here, so I kept it very, very simple. And then I'm going to glue my final pre-printed die cut to the front of that and add another charm. So for this charm, I'm using one of the boats. This is a silver boat in that embellishment pack. There's also some cords in there that I thought would be fun to add, but I didn't want to add any more texture because we're doing a shaker element here. It's already thick enough, and I thought we had enough texture to it. You can see how fun it is with those little sequin bits in the back moving around. It just creates a lot of texture and sparkle with that acetate in front of it and with the sparkliness of those sequins. Then we have our third card here where we have the star die cuts or star peel offs in that background. Again, super simple cards, and you can see when we lay them all out, the design is really, really simple. I don't necessarily need to change the design a lot because we have different pieces of the pre-printed die cuts as well as pre-printed papers. It's going to look a little bit different, but I really love how the circles on there echo the different pieces from Steamboat Willie. You'll find everything that I've used listed and linked in the description box below, and I also have another video with more inspiration up on the Love from Lizi channel. I will link that in the description as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. Have a fantastic day.